And it looks like we did it. So, hello, good evening. Welcome aboard. Good to see you. All of you who have joined me for this reading session. And as always, great pleasure to know that you are out there. Anything of interest today? No, today's been kind of one of those lost days after a very busy week and late night last night. Not a whole lot to tell today. Checked in with one of our dear friends in England. And other than that, just did some work, got ready to do this. And after that, who knows what kind of madness I might contemplate. Maybe I'll watch some TV or do some more reading. Sky's the limit. Anyway, hello. Good to see you. Not a huge amount to announce or describe this week about life in, at least in the Beale Williams Rancho. We are hanging out, we are working. I'm working on both of the volumes of the end of the new series, both Into the Narrow Dark and The Navigator's Children. Working on them at the same time, which sometimes makes for some confusing moments when you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I forgot to change that, and then you realize, oh no, wait, that's the other half, and I'm not even there yet, so I don't have to worry about it. Especially late at night when I do a lot of my thinking, because I'm already kind of in a semi-hypnagogic state anyway, so I'll be like thinking really hard about like, okay, well, I could do this and I could do that, and then I'll suddenly realize, wait, that's the first half of the book, and I'm already committed on that, so too late. That whole thought process was wasted. Well, such is life when you're juggling too many books at the same time. So no complaints really. Perfectly happy to be doing that. It's a lot better than many of the other things I have done in my life. It beats the heck out of selling shoes, folding burritos, throwing newspapers, although at least that got me out of the house. I spent several years of my life listening obsessively to NPR and what is it called? Is it the CDC? No, CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, because that was, what I would listen to while I was driving around throwing newspapers at various times of the day and night. Interesting job, actually. One of the coolest parts about it was that one of the places that I threw newspapers early Sunday morning, those big, giant, huge, remember newspapers? Big, giant Sunday newspapers with all the sections and everything. And one of the places that I delivered those was in a trailer park, not a trailer park, a mobile home park, out kind of on the edges of one of the local towns, not too far from the Baylands. And as a result, at night, which of course it was still very much dark and still the end of the night on Sunday mornings when I would do that, all kinds of animals would be walking around in this mobile home park, coyotes and raccoons and strange birds. I think that's where I saw my first heron, all kinds of things. And it was kind of surreal to be, driving along listening to, As It Happens or whatever, and throwing newspapers while coyotes are running down the street in front of me through my headlights and stuff. Anyway, I have no idea what brought that up except pure nostalgia. But let me say hello to everybody, and then we will get to the reading. So, who has checked in? Sean, my dear buddy Sean. Hello, Sean. Good to see you. Becca, yay. Good to see you too. Hello, Emily. Yes, you edited, you cleaned, you're ready for story time. Well, excellent. I edited. Haven't cleaned lately, as you can kind of probably tell by looking at the office behind me. And believe me, that's the clean side of the office. Jerry, good to see you, bud. And Claudia, good evening. Nice to see you. Yara, hello. I think Yara is new as far as checking in, so welcome aboard. Lovely to see you. Joining us in our romper room ritual. Those of you who are younger than me will probably not remember, many of you will not remember Romper Room, but Miss Nancy, who was the main Miss, I think that was just what they called her, and then she was a regional Romper Room host around the country, this children's television show way back when, and she would hold up her magic mirror and say hello to all the kids who were watching. And of course, she knew about them because they had written in and said they were watching. And so she would pretend. Well, I think she was pretending. Maybe she could actually see us through her magic mirror. That could explain some of the visits that we had from the police. Anyway, and Miss Nancy would say, and I see so-and-so and so-and-so. And that's what I always feel like when I'm going down the list here and saying hello to everybody. So anyway, Yara, welcome to the Romp Room portion of our reading program. Barban, good to see you. Kenneth, hello. Ray, greetings to you too. Carl, hello, pleasure to see you as well. Oh, thank you, Yara. I'm very happy to hear that. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you, but I'm very pleased to hear it. I have been around the rehab process for a few very dear people in my life, and I know that must have been very, very difficult. So anything that my books did, I'm very pleased and honored. Medardo, hello. Good to see you. Yeah, isn't the art for the new Tell Chaser song lovely? That Sean, the first person I said hello to, is the gentleman who is helming the publication of that. So you can render some thanks to him. So because he found the artists and all that other stuff. Anyway, so Medardo, though, as always, a pleasure to see you. Kelly, hello. Good to see you too. Tim, good evening. Timothy Roberts. Hello, Timothy. We've got a Tim and a Timothy back to back. And James. Hello. G'day, mate. And g'day, James. Nancy. Hello. Good to see you. Tony. Hello, Tony. A pleasure. And there's Sean popping back in again. Regina. Lovely to see you. Brent from Japan. Oh, excellent. Oh, wonderful. Mark. Greetings, buddy. Was just thinking about you the other day. Actually, Deb and I were just talking about you. Sent Deb a picture of a dragon bone chair. Oh, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing that. Tim is repping again for Canada. Canada. I love Canada. And who else have we got here? Jeremy. Rather tired. Had an actual performance last night. Murder Mystery Dinner Theater. The only time I've ever done a murder mystery dinner theater, I was the one who solved the crime. I have to say this, just in case any of you were thinking that my reputation for understanding and mastering twisty plot excuses and strange veiled clues was, either resting on my past laurels. Of course, this was like 20 years ago. But anyway, I solved the only murder mystery play, or whatever you want to call it, murder mystery dinner that I ever attended. And I was the only one. And that's because I wanted my food. I just wanted to eat. Anyway, yes, Mark, I see you, and I hope we do too. And Deb and I are talking about actually having some kind of a get together. So that may have a chance to happen. Kristen, hello, good to see you. I'm glad you're having better luck. John, pleasure to see you too. Jackson, as in Jackson, Mississippi, or Jackson, Michigan. I thought was Michigan, but I get confused. Yeah, because Mississippi is MS. Anyway, a mitten friend. A mitten friend. So does Jackson MI stand for Jackson Mitten? You guys will have to explain this to me. Anyway, all right. I think we've dealt with all that. Lovely to see the new folks who have showed up and identified themselves. I don't know if that means new in terms of this is the first time joining in. Hello, James. Good to see you. I don't know if that means it's the first time actually listening or the first time joining in. Whichever one, I know you talked about the mitten. I know, I'm kidding. Yes, Michigan. I remember. I'm joking. Well, I mean, I'm only half joking. I'm half joking in the sense that I had a momentary brain sputter, but then I did realize after that, and then I wasn't going to explain it because I didn't want to have to explain the brain sputter, but now I'm explaining it anyway. So what can a guy do? It's hopeless. Anyway, great pleasure to see you all, and especially those of you who I haven't had a chance to greet in person before, and lovely to have you. Let me think if there's anything else I have to talk about. Not off the top of my head. I don't have any immediate plans. I'm going to certainly be doing this the same times, et cetera, for the next few weeks while we finish the book. At some point, I might take a little time off and consider what the long-term future of this particular weird seance is going to be. But until that point where you've got more book to read, although actually it's disappearing quickly. Look at how little we've got left. And whether I am going to go ahead full bore and plunge into the 3 more very large books in the Shadowmarch series, or whether I will think of something else to do, or whether, as is always the possibility, I may just move to another state, change my name, and pretend I know nothing, which has worked for me in the past several times. I don't know yet, but I will let you know well ahead of time. And I imagine there will probably continue to be some kind of Tad presence on Sundays. So we will figure that out as we go. Okay, anything else needed to say? Not really. Oh, did I ever show you? Oh, it's almost gone now. You can't even see where the dog tried to kill me. I love that dog, but he has got paws like dinner plates. He's when we first got him, this is Johnny, our big dog. When we first got him, he was already about 70 pounds, 65 pounds, and good sized dog, part lab, part mastiff, part German short-haired pointer. So I knew he had the possibility of large forebears, and he had such large feet that I was kind of a little worried when we adopted him, for fear that he might grow into those feet and be like 130 pounds or something. He never did, thank goodness, and he topped out at about 80, and some of that, to be honest, is a little bit of middle-age spread that he's developed right over his haunches. Not much. He does a lot of running. But anyway, so I was very relieved that he didn't grow into those gigantic, practically, timber wolf-sized paws that he has. But he still uses them very effectively when he needs something, like when he hasn't been fed, or when he's excited that you've come back, or in the morning. I think the other morning it was that he wanted me to open the goddamn door so he could go out and pee. So I don't really blame him for his exuberant prancing on my face. But I have to say, if any pet is going to prance on my face, I'll get a hamster. Or something even smaller. A parakeet. No, parakeets. Yeah, I could probably deal with a parakeet on my face if I had to. Anyway, I don't know how I even got onto that. But there you go. Oh, because I was talking about the weird crescent scar, which is now almost gone. So obviously it wasn't much of an injury in the first place, and I'm ashamed I even brought it up. Okay, so we are reading Shadowmarch. If you will remember, well, you probably can't remember because most of you probably weren't listening late last night, but what was happening was Chert was on the island, was trying to get Flint, who had collapsed, and as far as Chert could tell, might even be dead, had collapsed on the island underneath the Shining Man. Chert picked the boy up, and remember the boy weighs about as much as him and is about the same size as him, and got him over his shoulder and staggered a short ways across the island trying to find where he had himself got in, and could not do it and collapsed, and then woke up to find something disturbing looking into his face, which turned out to be a bat and turned out to be the chosen steed of Beetledown the Bowman. But then the bat flew away. And Chert was despairing until he found out that Beetledown, tiny Beetledown, had gone and brought the Metamorphic Brothers, who are the Thunderling religious order. And that's where we stopped. And so that's where I'm going to pick it up, because I don't think I really need to read that section again now. Excuse me. There were more surprises. Chert even managed to surprise himself, despite being grateful to his rescuers, not to mention having been raised in the lifetime habit of trained respect toward their order. When he finally stumbled back into the temple, he answered all the brothers' questions about his journey and the Shining Man as truthfully as he could, but volunteered nothing about the mirror or Flint's unusual origins. If I tell them anything about where the boy comes from, he thought, they won't let him leave. He felt certain of that, although he was not sure why. Excuse me, let me just adjust my adjustable keyboard thing so I can get a little closer. Okay, and so I have something to rest my book on. He felt certain of that, although he was not sure why. The brothers were concerned, of course, and even a little angry about the boy's incursion into the mysteries, but not inordinately so. He knew that his reticence was selfish, perhaps even foolishly dangerous, but Opal was waiting for him back on Wedge Road, and she must be frightened now not just for the boy, but for her husband as well. He couldn't bear to think of going back to her, only to tell her the boy was being held prisoner in the temple. For their own part, the brothers brought him no farther into the temple than the outer chamber, the great room of natural stone that the people of Funderling Town were allowed to see on a few of the highest holy days. Even Chert's carefully shaped version of the tale was enough to make them examine the boy very carefully, while they made a fruitless attempt at waking him. Flint had no visible wounds, no lumps or bruises anywhere on his pale skin, but nothing they did could raise him from his deep sleep. Even wrinkled, wild-eyed old Grandfather Sulphur, whose prophetic dreams had apparently contained roof-toppers and disturbance at the sea in the depths, came in on the arms of two acolytes to examine Flint, which made Chert as nervous as walking on a slope of loose tailings. But the ancient fellow went away again, shaking his hairless head, saying that he saw and felt nothing special about the boy. At last Brother Nickel told Chert, "We can do nothing more for him. Take him home." Chert finished his cup of water. He had drunk a bucket's worth in the last hours, he felt sure, every drop a splendor. "I cannot carry him myself." "We will send a brother who can help you take him in a litter." "Methinks I will ride on that, friend Chert," said Beetledown in his tiny, high-pitched voice. "Better than thy pocket, being less whiffsome, beg thy pardon, and better than yon old flittermouse which tended to the bony." Nickel stared at the roof-topper with superstitious distrust, as though he were a talking animal, but went off to make the arrangements. Chert let a young acolyte named Antimony, moon-faced and broad-shouldered, take the front of the litter while he took the back. A silent crowd of temple brothers watched him go. Tired as he was, Chert was quite content to let someone else find the way and pick the best spots. He looked down at Flint, pale and motionless, but oddly peaceful. And even through his fear for the boy, he felt a new rush of gratitude to Beetledown and to the metamorphic brothers. At least he was bringing a living child, however ill, back to Opal. "You actually rode a bat?" he asked Beetledown, who, to lessen the chance of being accidentally crushed, was riding on the top edge of the litter near Flint's head. "A gutter scout am I. All animals we master to perform our duty." The tiny man coughed, then grinned. "And yon rat fellow was so piddling slow I could have outrun him my own self." "All I can say is thank you." "Arms be useful words, so no need to apologize on them." "You've been very kind to us." "All for honour of Queen and rooftops." He made a little salute. "And I have found thy stone world not so dull as I thought. Could thou only bring a little more wind, rain, and sunlight down into these holes, I would come again to make a visit." Chert smiled wearily. "I'll mention that to the guild." The shaking of the earth had frightened almost everyone in the castle, but there was not too much damage. Some crockery had fallen and shattered in the keep's huge kitchen, and a serving maid had been terrified into apoplexy when an ancient suit of royal armor in the privy gallery shook off its stand and collapsed to the floor in front of her. But otherwise the toll had been light. Still, even without the news from Marinswalk and the tremor, it would have been a hectic morning. Bryony was kept busy until after the noon bell, mostly working with Ninor and Brone to sort the movement and housing of the incoming troops, as well as many of the folk from the city outside the castle walls. The keep seemed crowded to bursting with people and animals, and the time had almost come when no more could be accommodated. She stole part of an hour to eat a meal with her great aunt, but it was not much relief. The Dowager Duchess was consumed with fear for Beric, just as Bryony was, and had also been waiting to question the Princess Regent, and, in several cases, argue with her, about the disposition of various nobles and their families within the inner keep. When their voices rose, Marilana's little maid Ilis watched with wide, frightened eyes, as if at any moment something horrible could happen in this unexpected and unsteady new world. Almost staggeringly tired, and with a long afternoon still stretching in front of her, Bryony walked back to the throne room from Marilana's chambers through the portrait hall. For once, her guards didn't have to hurry to keep pace. Although she had seen the pictures of her ancestors and their finery many times, so often that she scarcely glanced at them most days, today it was easy to imagine that they were looking down on her with disapproval, that Queen Lily's kind eyes were full of disappointment, that even the portrait of mournful Queen Sanasu looked more desolate than usual. It had only been a matter of a few months since Kendrick had been murdered, Bryony told herself, and far less than a year since her father himself had last sat on the throne. Yet what had happened? The kingdom was tottering, and that was more than just a fancy, as had been proved today most emphatically. It was difficult not to believe the trembling earth was the anger of the gods made manifest, a warning from heaven. Bryony knew she could not escape a heavy share of blame. She and Beric hated to be called children, but what else had they been? They had let what was given to them to protect fall from their fingers, left it out to rot like a discarded toy, like the body of a murdered man in a field. So grim were her thoughts that when the black-clad figure stepped out of a side corridor, her first unsurprised assumption was that one of her dead ancestors, perhaps Sanasu herself, restless and discontented, had come to point a finger of shame at her. It was unsurprising, though, that in such times her guards' first thoughts were more practical. They clattered to a stop around her and leveled their pikes at the veiled woman. "Is that you, Princess?" the figure whispered as she pulled back her veil. The superstitious prickle on Bryony's skin subsided, but only a little, as she recognized the face. "Elan? Elan McCory?" The Tolly's sister-in-law nodded. Her young face wore the mark of a terrible grief, a grief that Bryony recognized, as powerful as that which had seized her after her brother's death. "Galen is dead," the girl said. Bryony waved the guards back. For a moment she thought about saying the politic thing. It was early yet to be certain, after all. Nobody had seen the body who had known Galen well. But the look of misery in the girl's gray eyes that were nevertheless bone dry, touched her in that place of understanding and shared sorrows. "Yes, or at least it seems so." Elan smiled, a strange, grim little tug at the corners of her mouth, as though she had been confirmed in something larger and longer-lived than just a fear for Galen Tolly's life. Reassured in some bleak view of all existence, perhaps. "I knew it. I have known it for days." The eyes fixed Bryony again. "I loved him, of course, but he had no interest in me. I'm sorry. Perhaps it is better this way. Now I can mourn him for the right reasons. I have one more question. You must tell me the truth." Bryony blinked. Who was this girl? "I must answer only to my father, the king, Lady Elan, and to the gods, of course, but go to, ask your question." "Did you kill him, Bryony Eden? Did you have it done?" It was shocking to be asked so directly. She realized in the split instant between hearing and answering that she had become used to deference, more used to it than she had known. No, of course I didn't. The gods know that Galen and I did not agree on everything, but I would never. She stopped to catch her breath, to consider what she was saying and doing. Standing a couple of yards away against the wall, the guards were trying to hide their fascination. After a moment, Bryony decided it was too late for anything in this particular case except the truth. In fact, and you may hold this against me as you wish, Ilan McCory, Galen wanted to marry me, but I didn't want to marry him. I know that, but she sounded coldly satisfied. For his ambition. I do not doubt you are right, but that was not enough to endear him to me. The gods may bear witness that I'll have no husband who thinks he can tell me where to go, what to say, how to. She stopped herself again. What was it about this girl that had made her say so much more than she intended? Enough! I did not kill him. If he is truly dead, we do not know who did. Ilan nodded. She pulled her veil back over her face. Neither you nor any other woman will have him now. For the first time there was a muffled noise that might be a sob. I wish you heaven's mercy, she said quietly, then turned and walked away without a courtesy or farewell. It was indeed a very long afternoon, and as the news of the murdered men found in Marinswalk began to circulate, along with speculation about their identities, the day threatened to stretch without end. The news impinged directly on Bryony only slightly in her loyal duties, questions and quiet asides from Brone, a perfunctory meeting with the hedge baron in command of the Marinswalk muster, who was enjoying his moment of fame and attention, and an expanded set of concerns from Ninor, who had to decide whether to house these particular Marinswalk troops with all the others brought in to garrison the castle, or to try to keep them separate. But she also saw speculation in the faces of almost everyone who passed through the throne room, as if things had not been bad enough after her outburst at Hendon Tolly. It was so grueling that the appearance of Queen Anissa's maid was almost a relief. Celia, isn't it? With Barrett gone, it was hard to hold on to her resentment toward the young woman. Tell me, how is my stepmother? Well enough, Highness, with the baby so close, but she has concern not to see you. Bryony's head hurt, and she had trouble making sense out of the girl's foreign diction. She wants me to stay away? Celia colored very prettily. Like all else she did, it seemed an affront to any woman who wanted to do something other than make men sigh, or at least so it felt to Bryony, whose dislike of the maid was already returning. No, no, the young woman said. I do not speak so well. She wishes very much to have talk with you before the baby comes. I am quite busy, as my stepmother knows. The young woman leaned forward and spoke quietly. Brone and Ninor worked harder to pretend they were not listening. She fears you are angry with her. This is bad for the baby, for the birth, she thinks. She was too ill for talking with you before, and now your brother has gone, the poor Barrack. Celia looked genuinely sad, which only made Bryony less sympathetic. That's my brother you've set your cap on, girl, she thought. Aloud, she said, I will do my best. She asks that you come and take a cup of wine with her on Winter's Eve. Sweet Zoria, that's only a few days away, Bryony realized. Where has the year gone? I will do my best to come to her soon. Tell her I wish her only well. I will, Princess, The young woman dropped a graceful courtesy and withdrew. Bryony caught Brone and Ninor watching the maid as she walked away, and was disgusted that even old men should still be such lechers. She tried to keep it off her face as they all returned to work, but not as hard as she might have. The day's business dragged on as what seemed like almost every living soul in the castle came before her with a complaint or a worry or a request, with problems ranging from the crucial to the ridiculous. What she didn't see was Hendon Tolly, nor, after her meeting in the portrait hall with his sister-in-law, any sign whatsoever of the Tollys or their faction. "They are doubtless trying to decide what this discovery means," Brone told her in a quiet aside. "I am told they were out and about as usual this morning, but when they heard the news, they beat a retreat back into their rooms." "I suppose it makes sense. But why did we put the Tollys and Dustin Crowell and all the other troublemakers all so close together?" "Because Crowell requested it some time back, Highness," said Ninor. "At the end of the summer, he told me he would be hosting an entertainment with the Tollys during the Orphans' Day celebrations. I thought at the time he simply meant Duke Galen and his entourage." Bryony frowned. "Does that mean they were planning something even then?" Avon Brone grunted. "I don't trust the Tollys, but let us not pretend they're the worst of our problems." Old Ninor shook his head. "It is possible they had some scheme, Highness, but it is also possible that all they were planning was a banquet. And speaking of which, Princess, we must make some arrangements about the feasting." For a moment, she didn't understand what he was talking about. "Feasting? Do you mean for Orphans' Day? Are you mad? We are at war." "All the more reason." Stefan's Ninor could be stubborn, and had not been Castellan so many years without developing ideas of his own. Bryony was irritated and tempted simply to say no and dismiss him. But the thought of what her father would say, something like, "If you are going to give men tasks to do, then once they have proved themselves, you should let them get on without you standing over them. There is no point giving responsibility without trust." "Why, then, do you think we should do this?" "Because these are the holy days in which we praise the gods and demigods, and we need their help now more than ever. That is one reason." "Yes, but we can perform the sacrifices and the rituals without the feasting and merrymaking." "Why else do people need merrymaking, Highness, if not to take some of the thorns out of life?" The old man rapidly blinked his watery eyes, but his gaze was sharp and demanding. "Forgive me if I speak out of turn, Princess Bryony, but it seems that what a city under siege most needs is courage. Also, to be reminded what it is fighting to protect. A little happiness, a little ordinary life is a powerful aid to both those things." She saw the wisdom in what he said, but a part of her couldn't help feeling it would be a sham. That falsity was worse than misery. Avon Brone seemed able to hear those thoughts as if they had been spoken. "People will not forget the true dangers, Highness. I think Ninor is right. A muted festivity, perhaps. We do not want to seem to be celebrating too grandly in the shadow of war, and most especially in the shadow of Galen's murder, and your brother's death too, of course. But neither do we want to make this winter any more dreary than necessity dictates." "Very well. A quiet celebration it will be." Ninor nodded, then bowed and withdrew. He looked pleased, almost grateful, and for an unpleasant moment Bryony wondered if the Castellan had some other agenda, if he had manipulated her for some secret, selfish purpose. "And so it goes," she thought. I cannot even do the simplest thing without doubt anymore, without fear, without suspicion. How could Father live this way all those years? It must have been a little better in more peaceful days, but still, curse these times. Before they reached the populous areas, Beetledown announced that he was taking his leave. He dismissed Chert's worried questions. I'll find my way, sure. Not else. These caves seem full of slow, stupid rat folk. I'll go home mounted proud. I will see. Chert was too tired to do more than thank the rooftopper again. After all they'd shared, it was a hasty and strangely muted parting, but Chert didn't have long to consider it. In the midst of such strange times, their little procession was not the oddest thing the people of Thunderling Town had heard of, but it was certainly one of the odder things they had actually seen. By the time Chert reached his house with Flint and the acolyte, he was surrounded by a ragtag parade of children and more than a few adults. He did his best to ignore their questions and fondly mocking comments. He had no idea what time it was, or even what day. The young temple brother, Antimony, at the front end of the litter, told him it was Sky Day, fourth chime. Chert was astonished to realize that he had been almost 3 days in the lower depths. Poor Opal! She must be cracked with worry. The news had run ahead on child feet. A crowd of neighbors waited at the mouth of Wedge Road to join the throng. The tale had reached his own house as well. Opal ran out before he had even reached the dooryard, her face a confusion of joy and terror. He tried not to be upset that the first thing she did was throw her arms around the senseless boy, even though it nearly upset the litter. He was even wearier than he had realized, and could only struggle to hold his end up and shake his head in silent dismissal of his neighbor's questions. Burly Antimony helped clear a path to the door. He isn't dead, Opal said, kneeling beside the boy. Tell me that he isn't dead. He's alive, just sleeping. Praise the elders, but he's so cold. He needs your nursing, dear wife. Chert slumped onto a bench. She paused, then suddenly rushed to him and put her arms around his neck, kissed his cheeks. Oh, I'm so glad you're not dead either, you old fool. Disappearing for days. I've been fretting over you too, you know. I've been fretting over me as well, my girl. Go on now. I'll tell you all this strange story later. Antimony helped Opal move the boy to his bed, then turned down her distracted offer of food or drink, and went out instead to placate the waiting crowd with some unspecific answers. Chert suspected the acolyte didn't find this too dreadful a chore. From what he knew, the Temple brothers, especially the younger ones, didn't get much chance to come up to Thunderling Town. The market trips and other such opportunities for distraction and temptation were reserved for the older, more trustworthy brothers. He could hear Opal in the bedroom, crooning over the boy as she took off his dirty rags, cleaning him and checking for injuries, just as the metamorphic brothers had done. Chert didn't think fresh small clothes would be the thing that woke the boy, but he knew very well his wife needed to do something. Chert looked up at a rustling noise, aware for the first time that he was not alone in the room. A very young woman, one of the big folk, sat on their long bench in the shadows against the wall, staring back at him with an air of patient detachment. Her dark hair was gathered untidily, and she wore a dress that did not quite fit her thin frame. Chert had never seen her before, could think of no reason on or under the earth why someone like her should be in his house, even on a day of such bizarre branchings and cross tunnels. Who are you? Opal came out of the back room with a look close to embarrassment on her face. I forgot to tell you, what with the boy and all. She came about the second chime or so, and she's been waiting ever since. Said she must speak to you, only to you. I thought it might be something to do with Flint." The young woman stirred on the bench. She seemed almost half asleep. "You are chair of the Blue Quartz?" "Yes. Who are you?" "My name is Willow, but I am nothing." She stood up. Her head almost touched the ceiling. She extended a hand. "Come. I've been sent to bring you to my master." Chapter 35. The Silken Cord. The crabs. All are dancing. The moon is crouching low for fear he will see the naked mother of all. From the Bonefall Oracles. As the great hand closed around her, she felt it ringing like a crystal, a deep, shuddering vibration that had nothing to do with her, but which ran through that monstrous hand like a blood pulse, as if she were bound to a temple bell big as a mountain. The impossibly vast shape lifted her, and although she could not see its face, it stood in the center of some kind of fog, light shot but still deeply shadowed, as if a lightning storm raged inside the earth. She could see the greater darkness that was its mouth as it brought her nearer, nearer. She shrieked, or tried to, but there was only silence in that damp, empty place. Silence and mist and the dark maw that grew ever larger, spreading above her like a rolling thundercloud. The titanic thing was going to swallow her, she knew, and she was frightened almost to death. But it was also somehow exciting, too, like the shrieking, terrified childhood joy of being whirled in the air by her father, or wrestling with her brothers until she was pinned and helpless. Quiniton awakened, wet with perspiration, heart galloping. Her wits were utterly jangled, and her skin twitched as though she lay in the middle of one of the great hives in the temple. Let me start that one again. Her wits were utterly jangled, and her skin twitched as though she lay in the middle of one of the great hives in the temple, covered in a slow buzzing blanket of sacred bees. She felt used by something, by her dream, perhaps, even defiled. And yet, as her heart slowed, a languid warmth began to spread through her limbs, a feeling almost of pleasure, or at least of release. Quiniton slumped back in her bed, breathing shallowly, overwhelmed. Her hands strayed down to her breasts, and she discovered the tips had grown achingly hard beneath the fabric of her nightdress. She sat up again, shocked and disturbed. The idea of that dark, all-swallowing mouth still hung over her thoughts, as it had hung over her dream. She leaped to her feet and went to the washing tub. The water had been sitting since the previous night and was quite cold, but instead of calling for the servants to bring her hot water, she squatted in it gladly and pulled her nightdress up to her neck, then splashed herself all over until she began to shiver. She sank down into the shallow bath, still trembling, and put her chin on her knees, letting the water wick up the linen nightdress until it clung to her like a clammy second skin. The rest of the day was quieter and more mundane, although the torments of the endlessly droning prayers and the drinking of the sun's blood were as bad as ever. If Panhissir or the Autarch were trying to kill her with that potion, they were taking a ridiculously long time about it, she had to admit. But whatever they intended, they were certainly making her miserable. Just after Quiniton's evening meal, the hairdressing servant came to dye her red streak, her witch streak, as her childhood friends had named it, which was beginning to show at the roots again. Luyan and the other favored had decreed within days of her arrival that such a mongrel mark had no place on one of the Autarch's queens. The hairdresser also dried her hair and arranged it into a pleasing style, on the 1 in 1,000 chance the autarch should finally call for her that very evening. Quiniton tried to sit quietly. This hairdresser had a way of poking you with a hairpin, and then apologizing profusely, of course, when you moved too much. I doubt that she pulls that trick with the Rimini, she thought. But Quiniton didn't like thinking about the paramount wife. Since the day Quiniton had gone to her palace, there had been no further invitations and no outward sign of hostility, but it was not hard to see the way those wives and wives-to-be, who considered themselves friends of the Evening Star, watched Quiniton and made clear their dislike of her. Well, they might think themselves friends of the great woman, but she doubted Rimini looked on them the same way. Quiniton felt sure there was little room for friends or equals of any kind in the world with the paramount wife. The hairdresser was finishing up just as the soldiers on the walls outside began to call out the old ritual words for the sunset change of the guard. "Hawks, return! To the glove! To the glove!" Quiniton, reasonably certain that the autarch was not going to break his nearly year-long habit and summon her tonight, was looking forward to an hour or two of time to herself before sleep and whatever unsettling dreams might come with it. She thought she might say her evening orisons, then read. One of the other brides, youngest daughter of the king of some tiny desert land on the southern edge of Zis, had loaned her a beautifully illustrated book of poetry by the famous Bazujev. Quiniton had read some of it and enjoyed it very much. His descriptions of sheep herders in the arid mountains, who lived so close to the sky that they called themselves cloud people, spoke of a freedom and simplicity that seemed achingly attractive to her. The young desert princess seemed quite nice, really, and Quiniton entertained a hope that one day they might become friends, since they were two of the youngest in the seclusion. This did not mean she had abandoned all sense, of course. She never touched the book without wearing gloves. The tale of a paramount wife from a century or so before, who had dispatched a rival by having poison painted on the edges of a book's pages, was one of the first cautionary stories Quiniton had heard upon coming to her new home. That tale spoke much of the seclusion, not just the murderousness of the place, but the fact that the older wife had been willing to wait weeks or even months for the autarch's new favorite to cut her finger in such a way that the poison could enter when she turned the pages. Whatever men might say about women and their reputed fickleness, the seclusion was a place of immense patience and subtlety, especially when the stakes were high. And what stakes could be higher than to be certain it was your own child who would one day sit on the throne of the most powerful empire in the world between the seas? Gloves or no, Quiniton was looking forward to a little time with the epic simplicity of Bazujev, so it was disappointing, and, as always in the seclusion, a little frightening, when a messenger came just as the hairdresser was leaving. She was startled to recognize the mute boy who had come into her room not a fortnight before. He was wearing a loose tunic tonight, so she could not see how his wound had healed, although he seemed perfectly well. He would hardly meet her eyes as he handed her the roll of parchment, but although that saddened her, it was not as though she was surprised that he didn't want to be her friend. She had almost stabbed him to death with a dressing pin, after all. Strangely, the message was not tied or sealed in any way, although she could tell from the strong violet perfume that the paper was Luyan's. She waited until the hairdresser had gone out into the passageway before unrolling it. The letters had been made in a great hurry. It read, "Come now." There was nothing else. Quiniton did her best to be calm. Perhaps this was just an example of Luyan in a bad mood. They had spoken only occasionally in the last weeks and had taken tea together in their old way just once, an awkward occasion in which the subject of Jedin was in the air the entire time, but never acknowledged. The two of them had labored through a conversation of what should have been interesting gossip, but which had instead seemed like wearying labor. Yes, it was unusual for Luyan to write in this hurried, informal way, but it might be evidence of some great swing of feeling. After all, favored Luyan was prone to moments of heightened emotion that might have come out of a folk tale or even from a book of love poetry. Perhaps she planned to shame Quiniton for being a bad friend. Perhaps she planned a weeping renunciation of her own rights to Jedin, if even Luyan could be that self-deceiving. Or perhaps she just wished them to be on good terms again. All the same, Quiniton found herself following the mute boy across the seclusion with a heavy, untrusting heart. Quiniton was shocked to find a huge, ugly man weeping in Luyan's bed. Several heartbeats passed before she realized it was Luyan herself she was seeing. A Luyan without face paint, or wig, or elaborate dress, wearing only a simple white nightgown, damp with tears and sweat. Quiniton! Quiniton, praise to the gods you're here! Luyan threw her arms wide. Quiniton could not help staring. It really had been Dudon under that paint after all, the lumpy, self-absorbed boy who had walked up and down the streets, muttering the Nushash prayers. Quiniton had known it, of course, but until now she had not really seen it. Why do you shy away from me? Luyan's face was red and mottled, wet with tears. Do you hate me? No. But she could not bring herself to enter that embrace. Not from fastidiousness so much as the sudden fear of swimming too close to someone who might be drowning and dangerous. No, I don't hate you, Luyan. Of course not. You've been very kind to me. What's wrong? It was a wail that just avoided turning into a scream. Jedin has been arrested! Quiniton, for the second time that day, felt as though her body was no longer her own. This time it seemed to have become a statue of cold iron in which her thoughts were trapped. She could not speak. It is all so unfair! Luyan snuffled and tried to cover her face with her sleeve. What are you talking about? She finally managed. He has been arrested. It is the talk of the seclusion, as you would know if you came out to eat the evening meal, instead of sitting in your chambers like a hermit. She wept a little more, as though at Quiniton's unsocial behavior. Just tell me what happened. I don't know. He's been arrested. His lieutenant has been made chief of the leopards. At least for now, it's Vash's doing. That horrid old man. He's always hated our Jin. For the love of God, Luyan. For the love of the gods, Luyan. What are we to do? Quiniton's mind was already racing, but in a weary, defeated way, as if she were a runner at the end of a long chase, instead of just at the beginning. Luyan sobered a little, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. We must not lose our heads. Of course, we must not lose our heads. We must stay calm. She took a deep breath. It is possible. He has done something that has nothing to do with us. But even if they suspect the worst, he will never tell. Not Jedin. That is why I called you here, to make you swear to say nothing, not even if they tell you he has confessed. Don't speak a word. They will be lying. Our Jin will never say a word to Pinim and Vash, not even if they... She burst out, weeping again. They would torture him? Kill him? For sneaking into the seclusion? Oh, yes, perhaps. Luyan flapped her hands in agitation. But that is not the worst of it. She suddenly realized the mute boy was still standing in the doorway, waiting for further orders, and she waved him away with angry gestures. What is not the worst of it? Are you saying he has done worse things than proclaiming his love for one of the Autarch's wives? and smuggling himself into the seclusion where whole-bodied men are killed on sight? By the bees, what other crimes did he have time to accomplish? Luyan stared at her for a moment, or rather, this familiar yet unfamiliar man who talked like Luyan stared and then burst into tears again. He wished to depose the Golden One, the autarch. In the first lurch, Quiniton thought her heart might never beat again. She could speak only in a strangled whisper, which was perhaps just as well. He was going to kill the autarch? No, no! Luyan looked aghast. No, he would never raise his hand against the Golden One. He has sworn an oath. She shook her head at Quiniton's foolishness. No, he was going to kill the Skotarch, Prusus, the cripple. Then the autarch would fall, and somehow Jedin thought he would be able to take you for his own. Quiniton could only back away, waving her arms in front of her as though to keep away some approaching beast. The fool! The fool! But he will never tell. He will never speak a word of it. Luyan sat up on her knees now, arms spread again, begging Quiniton to come back and be enfolded. He is so brave, our Jin, so brave. Why did you help him? Why did you let him put your life and my life at risk? Quiniton was shaking, full of rage and terror. She wanted to run at Luyan and beat that doughy, wet face with her fists. How could you do that? Because I loved him. Luyan fell back against the cushions. My Jin! I would even help him to have you. I would do anything he asked. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed, but she was smiling. You understand about love. You are a woman. You were born a woman. You understand. Quiniton turned and ran out the doorway. Luyan called after her. Say nothing! He will never say a word! Our Jin will never... Quiniton reached the corridor, her thoughts tumbling like pearls from a broken necklace. Was Luyan right? Would Jedin's warrior code keep him silent even under torture? But it's not fair! I didn't do anything! I sent him away! She heard the footsteps then. Not the sandaled thump of the seclusion's guards, men big as oxen, but not the whispering slide of barefooted women either. She hesitated, but decided she did not want to be seen so close to Luyan's rooms. It would make it seem as though they had something to hide, meeting in the very hour of Jedin's arrest. If Luyan was right that Jedin could hold his secrets even under torture, the best hope was that all should seem normal, blameless. Quiniton stepped back into a shadowy cross passage just before the approaching figure turned the corner into the main hallway. She silently thanked all the gods there was no lamp in the wall niche. She looked for somewhere to hide, but could only draw back, close against a tapestry that hung on the wall. If whatever was passing gave anything more than the quickest glance, they would see her. She flattened herself and turned her head away, knowing that the magic of eyes invariably drew the attention of others, especially unwanted attention. Whoever it was stalked by without slowing. Quiniton let out a silent sigh of relief. She crept to the edge of the cross passage and saw a short, stocky shape turn into Luyan's chambers. It took her a moment to realize who had just passed. From the room, Luyan let out a shriek of startled fright. Quiniton could not help taking a few instinctive steps toward one who had been her friend and was now in danger. Then her better judgment stopped her. Tanisa's voice was hoarse, as though the gardener herself was a bit frightened too, but there was also a note of triumph in it. Favored Luyan of the royal seclusion, I am here as the hand of God. You have betrayed your sacred trust.
You have betrayed the master of the great tent.
What are you talking about?
There is no argument, said the gardener. The Golden One has put his seal on it.
Luyan's squeal of alarm suddenly turned into a loud grunting, a noise so horrid that for the first moments Quinniton couldn't even imagine it coming from a person.
You are for the worms.
Tanisa, breathing hard, spoke in almost ordinary tones now. Quinniton could barely hear her, although she stood trembling only a pace or two from Luyan's doorway. But there was a clear hatred in the voice.
You fat, meddling bitch.
The grunting turned to a choking hiss. Then Quinniton heard only the drum-like thumping of flesh on the stone, heels or hands, beating helplessly, until they too fell silent. And that's where we're going to stop for now, on that happy moment, cheerful ending, on that frisky, fun thing. But that's because it's after 8 o'clock. And although there's another couple pages left in the chapter, I think it's time to wrap it up. Not to mention the fact, as you can hear, that my voice is starting to rasp out a bit. So, with that, I will bid you all adieu until next week, Sunday 2 a.m., and then again Sunday in this time slot, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, here in California, here where the Pacific Standard Times. And I appreciate, as always, all of you kind folks who have called, rather who have signed in or are just hanging out. It's all good. And I will see you very soon. So until then, take good care of yourselves, take good care of your loved ones and your neighbors. And we're not done with all this pandemic crap yet, so hang in there. Keep doing the right stuff, and we will all get through. And in the meantime, have a really good week, because that's important too, because what good is it not dying from a pandemic if you're not doing anything? Life is to be lived, even if you have to live it with a mask on. So have a great week, do some cool things, and I will see you next Sunday, one way or the other, when we return and we all hang out again together. So thanks, au revoir, à bientôt, and I will talk to you real soon.